Okay, welcome ladies and gentlemen for number 2 in our beginner's tutorial for 3ds Max. So today I'm going to show you how to build a simple little house in 3ds Max working off of a blueprint. So I'll be showing you basically a box modeling technique as opposed to a poly modeling technique. So this is a great place for beginners to start. If you have never seen 3ds Max before, then I invite you to take a look at my first tutorial, which is available here on Twitch in my previous recordings, or you can go find me on YouTube at, I think it's Rob McCormick 1980. So, to get started up, let's open up this stream. Hi. So we're going to be building this house here today. We can just close that down. So this little house, I found a model on the internet, so you can easily just Google for an image, which I'll even show you that. And so if we look at the polygons here, you see this is very low poly, very simple, and shouldn't pose much problem even for beginners to get used to it. You notice that it's very low poly, so this could be even used in a mobile game or as an asset that's maybe a little bit farther away. As you get closer and closer to buildings, obviously you want to have a little bit more detail in there. Or if you're going into, the newer games, into films, you're going to want to have more detail. But this is an excellent place to start. And if we unhide all, you can see here the blueprints that I'm using. And you'll notice that I can see right through that design, and I'll show you how to do all of that. We're going to start right from scratch. So I'm just going to go ahead and reset max. Don't save. Yeah, I want to reset. Right, so we are back at default. So the first thing we're going to do is just click on the plus here on the perspective window, and we're just going to maximize that port, uh, give us the most space to work with. So before we actually get into modeling, we're going to want to work from a design. You generally want to work from a design, have reference to go by, because if you're just working out of your head and trying to invent things, for some people, like architects, that's exactly what they want to be doing. For a lot of people, you're going to want to at least start from existing designs before you go on and start working on your own. And so the first thing you want to do is go find an image. So if I just grab up my internet browser here at Google, we can go and do house orthographic. So we'll go for images. And one little tip here, when you're going for a reference, they might look fine here, but when you bring them in, they're going to be very jaggy, very low res. Because you look at a lot of these here, 256 by 323. That is, this size is as big as that image is going to uh, that's the max size is going to look good. See, if I start zooming in on this image, if I try to design off of this is just going to be muddy, right? So let's just go on back. And actually the house, so yeah, so what you want to do is click Search Tools, Size, Large. And so the house that I'm using is actually this image right here. So it came right up for me. You notice it's 1407 by 1000. So that's big enough for us to work with when it comes to a line drawing. So we're going to view image. I always click so that it's as big as possible. Thank you to Cartwright Architectural and Planning Services and Cartley Development Limited. They're the ones that created this design. I am using it for non-commercial use. I'm not expecting to use this in a professional case. So you just want to, yeah, make it as big as possible, right click, save image as, and you just save it to wherever you want. Now, of course, I already have that saved, so we're just going to close that down. So once you have it saved, it might not be very well lined up, right? If we just go, actually, let's go file, let's open the original. And if we come down here in these blueprints to, oh, have I gotten rid of the original? Okay. Well, you notice on the original there was the sign at the bottom that showed the creator, and not everything was nicely lined up. So I just came in here, got rid of the logo. It's nothing that I need. Got rid of the words. It's nothing that I need, and I lined these up. So you can easily line them up if you hold Control and press R for ruler. You get this ruler, so you can bring down guidelines to line things up. And actually, what I did afterwards was draw out actual guidelines so that when I'm lining things up in 3ds Max, I don't have to estimate. I can just line up those exact lines and it'll be exactly where I want it to be. So you see the after image here, I've added these couple of guidelines actually on the image. So when I import it, why are you doing it that way? All right, so when I import it, it's already going to have these guidelines and will be much easier to work with. So coming over to 3ds Max, first thing we're going to do is press M for material, and that gives us this dialog box. So this is our material editor. You may see this differently. You may see this come up. I'm not sure which one is the default. I've changed my defaults, obviously, to that other one. So in this version, what you can do is drag out a standard material, drag out a line from diffuse. Diffuse is your general paint information, your color information, and a bitmap is a general image. Now, don't think of it as it has to be a BMP bitmap file type. It just means that it's a standard image file. And mine were in blueprints, and down here we find the House BP guides, right? So I changed the file name so you can see there's guides there, and that's plugged in. And you can do that for all these others. So specularity, glossiness, self-illumination, opacity. Those are all your different maps that might be on one object. So what I'm actually going to do is just reset this, and the more well, I think it's the more common method is the compact material editor. And I kind of like looking at this too. You can double click on it and you'll see a larger version of the material stretched around a sphere. You can change by this top, just click and hold, change it to a cylinder, change it to a box. Um, it, it really matters more how you're going to be using it and what makes sense to you to look at it, right? If you're making a model wrapped around something, a cube isn't going to be terribly helpful because you'll be looking at the image flat on a side and not wrapped around. But because we're doing just a blueprint here, a square flat face is exactly what we want. So instead of dragging out that line, you can see right here diffuse. And I can click on the gray and choose a color. So now it's going to be pink, and you can see it immediately updating over here, whatever color I choose. And you can change the hue and saturation by clicking and dragging over here, or setting exact numbers. If you were given the color numbers, you can plug them in right there. For instance, to match a website or whatever, you'll have the exact colors. So we don't care about that. We actually want to add an image. So we're going to click here. There's a little box right beside the gray diffuse that says none as I hover over it to say that there's no image currently in there. So let's go ahead and click on that. And we've got this great long list. It's like, oh, where's just normal old image? It's bitmap. A lot of these others can be really handy for, well, a gradient. So you see it going from black down to white, and you can change what the maximum, minimum, and medium point is. But what we actually want here, and if you chose the wrong one, right at the top here, there's the type of file. So we'll just click gradient and switch that to a bitmap. Again, find our house guides, open, and now you can see it here. We don't really need any of these other settings, and right now we've gone into the settings for that image. So we're going to step back up and go back to the top level, go to parent. So that looks like a checkered circle with an upside down enter button, right? The arrow that's over and up. So now we're back to that. See, I went into the material and back out, sorry, into the map and back up to the general material. Now we want to put this on a plane, right? So we're going to want to use this as a reference. So let's go ahead and put a plane down. We're going to minimize how many segments because we're only going to need, well, actually, we're going to need two on each, right? Because one, if I hide the grid, is just the outside edges, right? It's one big flat plane. So we're actually going to need to cut that in half two ways. So I'm just going to put this to 2 and 2 immediately. So we're going to have each of the houses, uh, each side of the house on a different plane. Now to apply this material, we can easily just click and drag it over and it tells you as you come over it. So it says plane 001. So that tells me that I'm putting it on this and not something that's right next to it. I can also say assign material to selection, right? So the little checker box is generally the material, and it's a little down arrow to a green box, meaning the highlighted selection. So when I click that down or drag this over, it put the material on there, but right now we can't see anything because we have it set by default to not show the material. But 3ds Max does that. So you'll see over here, checkerboard with a little light bulb. So we're going to click on that, and we can see it there. So see, we've got our red guidelines, but we can see it on both sides. Now, you'll see in a minute why that's not going to be a good thing, because we're going to want to see through one side to see the other. And we're going to be putting these reference images around the 3D model. So if I rotate this around, I'm going to have this reference smacking me in the face when really I want to see the model and that far reference behind it. So we're going to want to see through this side. So right now, two-sided, you generally assume when that's checked, is going to show it on both sides. And we don't have it checked, but it's still showing it on both sides. Now that's because we've got it in a particular mode. So what we want to do, this check box with the light in front, we're just going to select the other one. Oh, sorry, that other one. And now it disappears on the back side, but it's still up here. Generally speaking, most models are going to be single-sided materials, right? So for instance, a body, you're going to see the paint information on the person's chest. But if you were to place the camera inside the body, you would not see the body at all, right? You would be seeing through the inside of the faces, which have no paint information. So same idea here. Now, luckily, our guides are perfect right now. Now I'm going to show you how to fix that if it's not. The other thing is, if I actually open the original image, let's go to my pictures, reference, blueprints, and open, whoops, the house BP guides, and we can just close that back down. If I bring this over, you can see this kind of looks fatter than it does here, right? Everything seems kind of stretched, and it is. And that's because of the proportions of the image, right? So right here we've got a length of 2.246 and a width of 2.545. But that doesn't line up with the proportions of the image, right? If I take this and I start stretching it, it is stretching the image back and forth. And you don't want to just kind of guesstimate this, right? Because somebody, if you're working as a professional, somebody is going to be giving you a particular design that is meant to be very specific proportions. So you're going to want to try to match that as closely as physically possible. So to do that, we're going to set the plane size to be the same proportion as the image. Now I remember that the image was 1000 by 1407. So we can go 1 by 1.407. That might look a little bit stretched the other way. So 1.407 by 1. No, I think I had it right the first time. 1.407. Is that right? I'm not sure that it is. Let me double check that. Don't look at that folder. Guides. So yeah, 1000 by 1407. So the length, 1000, is just the 1, and the width is 1.407. And we can easily change that, right? We can say it's 10 meters by 14.07 meters, and that's probably a little bit closer to actual size, probably actually too big. But we're going to start there. We can scale it to match whatever else afterwards. So next thing is that this is a single plane. There's nothing we can really do with this except place it, rotate it, and we can scale it up and down, but we can't break it apart into separate pieces. So, and actually we don't need this material box anymore. So what we're going to do is right click on it and come down to the bottom here, convert to editable poly. Almost everything that you're going to be working on in 3ds Max is going to be an editable poly. Some people work in editable mesh for whatever reason, or need to finish with an editable mesh perhaps, but generally you want editable poly. In 3ds Max, that gives you the greatest variety of tools, the greatest options to be able to work with it. So that's where you want to start. So as an editable poly, we're going to break this up along this and along this edge. To do so, we're going to grab by face, grab one face, and we're going to detach. And we're going to detach that as back, right? So now this is no longer selectable because it's a separate object. And these are still together. If I deselect face so that I can select a different object, I can now move this over as a separate object. Next, we're going to just come on back to this one, and we're going to do exactly the same thing for these others. So we come over here, detach. That's going to be the right side of the building. We're going to detach this as the left side of the building. And this is already detached as a separate object, right? Because I've already detached these three. That leaves only that one available. So we're just going to change its name up here to front. So before we get to placing these around our object, around our what's going to be our object, you notice the pivot points are all down here on the inside vertex, right? Because that used to be the middle of this one piece. When they were back connected together, that was the very middle of that object, which is the default pivot point. So what we're going to do is put the pivot point into the middle of each of these boxes to make rotating a little bit easier and make placement a little bit more logical. So to do that, we come up to the top. So our first tab was create, to create geometric primitives, right? These are just primitive shapes, box, sphere, cone. Uh, the second one is our modify tab. So that's how we change things around, how to modify topology, move dots and vertices, edges, faces around. And the next one over is hierarchy. So this is how we're going to change where this pivot point is. So we're going to affect pivot only, center to object, and we're going to go ahead and center it to each of the objects, and then deselect affect pivot only so that we're not moving the pivot. And you'll notice that when I click affect pivot only, I get a second set of arrows. Now these wider arrows, here if I zoom right out, that's all you're going to see. These wider arrows tell me that I'm affecting something about the object and not affecting the object. There are a couple of situations where these arrows are going to come up. The most common one is going to be your affect pivot. So we just zoom back in, deselect to affect pivot only, and now if I select any of these, the pivot point is right in the middle. So let's select all of them by making a nice big marquee. We're going to rotate, but to keep these all on the same plane, we're going to rotate local, right? This drop-down menu tells you what kind of pivot are we going to look at. So by view, by the screen, so it's actually going to line up with the current camera view. By world, obviously, is the world coordinates. By parent is if it's attached to something. Local means each object's local direction. So you'll notice that here, because we're in local, when I start rotating, it's rotating each object. Put the ground plane down. You can see I'm rotating each object while keeping them in their position. Whereas if I were to go world from center, now I'm rotating this as though it was one big piece and right from the middle of it. But we don't want to do that. We're going to grab local again, start rotating. Now, I'm not going to be able to find exactly 90 degrees, right? If I, of course I do. It can be very difficult to find exact numbers when it's going through every angle, right? You can see just above my gizmo, 30.56, negative 9.01, or at the bottom, right? Down here, it tells me those numbers also, right? So 31.43, 51.28, that's not terribly helpful. We want it to snap right to 90 degrees. So I'm going to press A for angle, and you see this button showed up, right? If I toggle A, you can see that button showing up and not. So while this is blue, which means it's activated, it's going to snap to particular angles. So as I start rotating, you notice here it's by 5 degrees. So I can easily go to 90 degrees, stop right there, we're gold. Next, um, this is the back, this is the front, and these are two sides, but they're all facing front, so that's not terribly helpful to us. So we're going to grab that one and hold Control to add to the selection, and that one, and we're going to rotate 90 degrees sideways. Next, we come back to these front and back. Well, we're going to be working in this space. So let's go ahead and move this along X to 0. So I can do that by right-clicking on that number down at the bottom here. But now they're both facing front. And I need to be able to look at, you see, if I look from the back, there's nothing there, right? I need to be able to see the the back of the house when I'm looking from the back, and the front of the house when I'm looking from the front. So this is the front. So I'm actually going to, and you'll see this up here says front. So I can line that up. But actually I'm going to push this back here because if I hide unselected, when I'm looking from the front at the front of the building, I want to have this design be behind the model that I'm making. So I can see through the object to see the reference behind. And I'm going to do the opposite. So right click on hide all. I'm going to do the opposite with the back. Since this is the back, I'm going to bring this to the front, and I'm going to mirror this. So you notice um, they're both facing front still, so let's mirror. So this icon up here that looks like an M with a vertical line through the middle, it's actually showing the two angles being mirrored one to the other, and M for mirror. So let's just click on mirror. So we get this dialog box here that's asking us what axis do we want to mirror on. So by default it's selected X, and X is side to side mirroring, which for us isn't terribly helpful, right? I put the chimney is over here on the wrong side, so how about by Y? Oh, well that feels a little bit better because I can't see through this side, which is what we want, right? I want to be able to look from the back, which is out over here, and see this on that side. So I'm going to assume that's correct and click OK, flip this around. I can easily undo that. Control Z for zebra is going to do that for us. So yes, that is the back, and that's looking from the back. I see the back. Now let's do the same thing for the sides. So if we grab this, we're going to want to move this along the Y to 0. So we just come down here, right click, select that one, right click, and this is the left of the building. So if we're on the left, we want to be able to see this image. So we'll mirror that. Now this time Y is not going to help us because Y is uh, side to side if you're looking for the front. So X, that's the way we want it. And you notice we've got the sunroom here on the back, and this is towards the back. So we know that that's the right side, the correct side. All right. And this one, since we know that it's already facing the right direction, we're just going to move it over here. So now we've got our four planes, and let's actually move them a little bit closer together, and you'll see why in just a second. That's fine. And we grab this one and move it over a bit. So now, this is why we have these red guidelines, right? If I start moving this around without those red guidelines, it can be very difficult to line up exactly where we want that to be. So I'm just going to actually make a little box just to see the ground plane a little bit better. Because when we draw out the first, without any special settings, it's going to start at the 0 XY, the 0 Z coordinate, which is the ground plane. And you notice when I drag it out, it's right on that grid in the middle. And if I drag up, then we're going from the ground, moving upwards. I'm just going to drag that down a little bit. So it's actually making a ground plane. We're going to delete this box in a minute. It is only for reference. So we can grab this. One other thing, we are now in perspective, right? So we're seeing a foreshortening effect, which is not going to help us during modeling, and it's going to help us even less trying to line these things up. So we're going to switch this perspective to orthographic. And we can easily toggle between the two by pressing U for orthographic and P for perspective. And you can see these hotkeys here, right? So perspective is P, orthographic is U. We also do top, bottom, front, and left. Back and right do not have their own quick key buttons. You can easily just come up here and click on this box, this gizmo, if you need to do that. But for now, we want orthographic, and we're going to click left here to make sure that we're perfectly lined up. I'm going to press G for grid to hide that grid. And we're also going to change this to shaded. And you see that gets rid of the shadows there and makes it a more consistent color across the whole. So we can move this up and line it up so that that red line is going to be lined up with this box. Now that can be a little bit tricky because we can't see. Oh, I selected the one behind. So because we can't see where that line actually ends up, right? We can kind of assume, oh, well, it just disappeared. But one tool we're going to be using over and over in this exercise is transparency. So hold Alt and press X for X-ray, and you can see right through this object now, right? I can see everything there, and that's going to help us in modeling too. So we'll be able to see the model and the reference behind. So let's come on to our left, select that one. Oh, I selected the one behind, so just select that one again. We're going to bring this down right so that that red line sits right on the edge of this box. Let's say the bottom of that red line. Now we're going to come over here and we'll do the same thing. So we drag this up. Now this one already had a ground plane, so I actually didn't need one there. Grab the back of the house. We do the same, drag this right up to there. And we drag the front of the house right up to there. There we go. So at least they're all on the ground. And now, if we look at this on a straight diagonal, so you can click straight back, click on arrow, it switches straight to the left face. You can also click over just on the edge, right? If I grab this by the corner, just look at this gizmo up here. You can see I can go straight to a face, straight to the diagonal between the face, or straight to the diagonal between those three faces. I'm going to go straight to this diagonal, and you can see these lines line up perfectly. right? We're going to go over here, also lines up perfectly, and one more time on this angle. Oh, and you can press Z to recenter, right? If you get way over here, you don't know where you are anymore, Z, and it'll come back to whatever you have selected. If Z, for whatever reason, isn't doing anything, if you deselect and come out here and, okay, well, it's remembering it this time. Sometimes there's some issues, so you can always come up here beside the gizmo. When you hover over here, there's a little home button, so you can click on that, and it brings us right back to the middle of our world. So let's just move these a little bit further apart again so that they are not interfering one with another, and so that one isn't in front of the other. We don't want that. So just move these away. Comes that. Now, we don't actually need this box, so we're going to get rid of it. Whoa! We can keep it and we'll edit it. So we're going to go from its pivot, which is to say on its bottom, oops, Alt X, we're going to hide that. Actually, this one, it's top, because I dragged down, it's actually in a negative. So yes, I am going to delete that, create a new box. I didn't hide it. Just making sure I didn't delete a face, one of my reference planes as well. So now we've got a box. Pivot point is in the bottom center because I dragged up instead of down. Because when you drag down, the bottom plane is actually the top. And we're going to put this in the center of the world. So we go 0, 0, 0, just by right-clicking on each of those. And now we've got our box that we're going to start working with. We're going to start it right at that, no extra edges, right? Just one edge on each side, which is, say, one face. If we were to add these up, sure, I might in the end need this many edges, but I don't want to start there because that means I have to start working little edges at a time, right? If I wanted to, if I crank this up, convert to editable poly, and grab, let's say I just wanted to make that rooftop. If I pull this up, okay, well, I can start pulling these up to a lesser extent and then grab these and pull them up to a lesser extent. But that's both hard to line up and is giving you more work than is necessary. So we're just going to put that back, undo all the way back to it just being a box, and we're just going to say one on each side. And we're going to rename this immediately to call it house. If you don't like this orange color for whatever reason, you can click on the orange box up here and select whatever color you want it to be. And another handy thing is that you can say assign random colors so that every new object you create will be assigned a new color. If that's unchecked, every new object is going to receive this same color. Um, Depending on what you do, that could be very helpful. For instance, if you're doing mechanical and you're making struts and hydraulics and, bigger pieces, you might want to have everything be gray. So as you're creating new objects, they all stay gray. It looks a little bit like metal, at least the color of metal, and it's not blue and pink and orange and red, and that can get distracting. So make it gray. Nah, gray is too boring. Let's make it orange. There you go. Nice little orange house. And again, we can hold Alt, press X, and we'll be able to see straight through this. Because we clicked on home, we're now back in perspective. So press U and we'll come back to orthographic. And now we're going to start lining stuff up. So you want to start with as simple, as big a shape as possible when you're box modeling, and then refine, refine, refine. So let's get started. So let's right click, convert to editable poly. Now we can start working. So I'm going to start by just selecting vertices and start moving these around. So that's going to line up with about there. That's going to line up with the back of the house. scroll wheel to zoom in, scroll wheel to zoom out, hold the middle, hold that scroll button to move around and pan around, hold Alt, and then add that middle click, and you'll rotate freely. Just gonna come back to the right. Let's grab these up front and drag these back to there. I think actually these top vertices are a little bit high, so let's just drag that down. And we go from the front, drag these over, and drag these over. And let's just make sure when we look from the back, this is also lined up. And when we go from the left, wait, what's going on there? Okay. This feels a little bit off. So what I'm going to do to verify is press M. We're going to get this, and let's go two-sided. So by selecting this face, we can make sure that those are actually lined up correctly, which it does look like they are. Maybe slightly off, actually. Looks a little down and to the right. I feel like that's a slightly better fit. And again, let's do this from the front. That one's good. Okay, so we're just going to turn two-sided back off, close that, select our mid-box. Oh, you know what? Let's show you another thing you'll want to keep organized, right? If you get into creating especially complex objects, maybe you're modeling an entire scene, um, this list of objects can become excessively long. So you don't want to have everything be in one folder. You want to separate things by folders. So what I'm going to do is separate my reference planes from the house and have them in two different folders. That way I can easily hide things and unhide without affecting the other group of objects. So the majority of the objects are the reference planes, right? I've only got the one object that is not a reference plane, so I'm just going to put the house on its own layer. So to do that, there's these three little pages with a star beside it, so that's create new layer, and it automatically took everything that I had selected and dropped them into that new layer when I created that layer. So I'm going to call this house. And so later on, I can, and you'll see I can easily click on this light bulb is show and hide. I can show and hide each individual object within that or the entire object. And in house, there's only the house object, that there. Um, in these folders, you'll see some other options. You can freeze objects, which makes them unable to be selected. And by default, makes them go gray like this. Now, I don't want to be able to move these reference planes around, right? I don't want to accidentally grab one and move it away. Control Z to undo that. So I'm actually going to select all my reference planes, which I can also do in here by select, hold Shift, and click on the last, and it's going to select everything down. Or I can deselect, hold Control, I'll select one, hold Control to add to the selection, and I click on each one. And then right-click, Object Properties. And you get this new Object Properties window. And we're just going to come over here. Don't concern yourself about most of this. Most of this we don't really worry about the majority of the times. So we're going to just go show frozen in gray. Uncheck that. And that way, okay, when I freeze it, right, if I drag this out, you can see frozen. So I'm going to freeze, sorry, not the house, I'm going to freeze that whole layer. So now I cannot select any of my reference planes because they are frozen. I can just uncheck that and I can select them again, or I can right click, unfreeze all, or freeze selection. So I can do, there's always more than one way to skin a cat in 3D modeling. So I can grab these, right click, freeze selection. Grab these, freeze selection. And now I'm back to not being able to select it. I can't click on it. There's nothing to be had. So those are no longer going to be getting in my way as far as, oh, I clicked the wrong thing. Which could happen, right? If I'm working on this side and I click there, there's something in front of it. So you can easily be selecting the reference plane. So let's freeze it in place. That way we don't have to worry about it. And we're going to go back to modeling. So we've got our house selected. Let's close the Scene Explorer. We don't need to see that anymore. So the next thing we want to do, I think, is pull up the roof, right? We're going to, again, large geometric shapes, keep it as simple as possible. So let's go right to the right-hand view. Going to grab edges, just marquee select up, and that grabbed all these edges. Right click, connect. Now let's connect with options. Whenever you see this little box beside something, that means that there's more options that can be had. And that's generally a good idea. So we're going to go ahead, yeah, one edge. We don't need to pinch. Pinch is that you can squeeze them together, push them apart. Right click to reset, and slide is literally sliding them along that edge. Right click to reset that.